So hey there, in this video we're going to take a look at pancreatic tissue. In this tissue, again, the goal is going to be make sure that we can recognize it as pancreatic tissue or the pancreas. And what we're going to see here is we're going to see a kind of a SEA of what's going to be called acinar tissue, A-C-I-N-A-R, that is going to be punctuated with small, sometimes a little bit larger islands of different cells, different looking cells, that we're going to call islets of Langerhans or pancreatic islets. Islets of Langerhans is kind of an older term, trying to keep his name alive, but pancreatic islets is the more modern term, I guess. Now the thing with the pancreas is that sea of tissue that these islets, and when I'm saying islets, it's I-S-L-E-T-S, not islets like E-Y-E-L-E-T-S, like on your shoe, for example. Talking about, like, I think it translates to small island. So you have this C, and so that kind of fits, S-E-A, of acinar tissue, which is the exocrine portion of the pancreas. So remember, pancreas has an exocrine function as well. It makes and secretes or digestive juices into the small intestine. And then those little punctuated islets or islands of these different cells that make up the pancreatic islets, that's the endocrine portion of the pancreas. And so, you know, again, what we're going to see, depending on, and I say again, depending on what video you've watched, but one of the things with endocrine glands, endocrine tissue that I find pretty consistent is that endocrine tissue, endocrine glands have a grainy appearance. We're going to see that same thing here. Now, sometimes depending on the preparation of the slide, the pancreatic tissue can be, or sorry, not the pancreatic tissue, but the pancreatic islets can be fairly easy to see. Sometimes it's a little harder. It just depends on the stain. Sometimes the islets are lighter in color, sometimes they're darker in color. So we'll continue to the rest of the video, and we'll take a look at these two and look for those defining features, and again ask ourselves, how can we know this is pancreatic tissue or the pancreas? I'll see you in the next slide, in the next video. All right, so let's start off with this slide here. Let's get it in focus. So this one here, we can kind of start to see some things. It's not really very, very apparent, and that's what stinks about this. So most of this tissue that you see here is going to be pancreatic acinar tissue. It's a little darker. I'm going to have to wait until we get a little closer, but I'm thinking that if you see like this area right here, and if I can, on the video when I do editing, if I can try to maybe outline this, I think this is an islet of Langerhans. It seems super big, but you know, I don't know that they have any kind of size limit or anything like that, but that might be what this is. I'm not quite sure yet. If we go around the rest of it, I'm not sure I see anything that sticks out at me. These are probably some ducts or maybe blood vessels, those openings there. That looks like it's probably a duct maybe. I'll have to look to see if that's where red blood cells in there. But this little patch, I don't know if you can see that it's kind of clear there. That might be an islet. I do want to make sure you understand, I don't think this is going to be an islet. They're not that distinct. Typically, you kind of have to look for them. This might be one here. I'm not quite sure. This might be one right there. Maybe one right there. But this is, you know, this is not the best. The best slide that I've ever seen for for pancreas. So, you know, we'll take a look at it and we'll see what we can find. So let's go to, so that was 40x. Let's go to this is the 100x. So we're starting to see a little bit of differentiation. I know. Well, first of all, notice the granularity of it. Again, remember I said at the beginning of the video, this is going to have, you know, this is an endocrine gland. So it's going to be, it's a gland, it's glandular tissue. Again, in my limited experience, seems to be grainy just because of the shape of the cells and how those are packed together. So I'm thinking that might be one there. So you can see that these cells are a little bit different looking than the cells around here. Again, I'm not a big fan of this slide. Just doesn't seem to be a lot of contrast between, so that's probably an islet there. We can see that these cells here have a little bit darker of a cytoplasm. These cells here have a little lighter cytoplasm. Maybe that's an islet there, or an islet. Don't say islet, but if it helps you spell it, I-S-L-E-T, then that's okay. Just don't say it that way. I don't want you guys to get laughed at. Yeah, so not the best slide. But let's go to 400x, see if we can see something. So what we can see here is this is mostly acinar tissue, and typically, from what I understand, acinar tissue is typically kind of in a, kind of imagine a sphere with a stalk coming out or a tube coming out of it. That would be an acinar unit. I don't know if that's the word that's used to describe that. But these are all pancreatic acinar cells. So these are making and secreting digestive juice. What a fun word, right? Digestive juice. I'm going to see if I can, I'm only using one arm. I'm going to use two arms because if I use two arms, my face gets a little bit away from the microphone. So if you hear me going in and out, that's probably why. I'm going to try to do this and still talk towards the microphone. Yeah, so here I'm seeing a difference here. So see how these cells are a little lighter, these are darker. Notice the arrangement, they're not really, see how these all are arranged kind of like in a circle around like a central point. And this is because that's how those cells are arranged. They are what we call polarized cells. We can see the nuclei. I mean, this is a great one right here. The nuclei are towards what's called the basolateral surface. So this is the apical surface. You can kind of almost see like this central, that's where the tube is coming from. But what's happening is all the exocrine secretions, all the digestive juices is being made down here, and it's being squirted out on this end into that little tube, which is going to be a duct, and those ducts eventually converge, and they empty into the small intestine via either the main pancreatic duct or the accessory pancreatic duct. Yeah, so that's a great one right there. Now, so that's how we know this is acinar tissue. I don't really see that organization here, so I'm going to say this is more than likely an islet. Again, I don't really like this slide for an exam or a quiz, but I want to show you these differences because sometimes the stain just doesn't work out, or we don't see necessarily some of the same visual cues that we see from one slide type to another. Again, what did I just do? Oh, there we go. Again, this is all acinar tissue. I don't know if those cells are, but yeah, so I mean, sometimes you can't really depend on light, dark. Sometimes you have to look at just structure and kind of imagine it black and white. Here, I'm going to say this is an islet here, I-S-L-E-T, because again, notice the structure of these. They're all kind of, not so much here, and some of this is getting destroyed from, being cut. But these are definitely not looking like they were organized in any specific way. So that's an islet there. I'm not a fan of this, of that image. We've got another one coming up. Let me go ahead and load it up. But hopefully that was a little valuable, and you could see at least, how I want you to think about these slides. Again, we don't want to try to memorize a color. We're not trying to memorize a picture. We're trying to understand a concept. Okay. Now, I think this one ends up being, this is a good one, because now I hope, so we see a little bit more contrast here. So all the dark purple here is acinar tissue, but we'll see these little lighter regions. There's one, I think that might be one. Here's a larger one right here. There's one right there. There's one right there. Now, I'm not talking about these things here. I think that's probably like one of the big pancreatic ducts. And I think that just because the luminal side of whatever this tube is very, it's convoluted. It's not just kind of like a flat surface that you would find in like a vein or an artery. So that's why I'm thinking this is probably, plus it looks like we've got some, I don't know if that's significant smooth muscle. I mean, arteries have smooth muscle in them as well. Veins do as well. It just doesn't look like a blood vessel just because of that jaggedy inner surface. That just wouldn't work well with a blood vessel. So that's probably a duct. Again, I'm not concerned that we know that. That looks more like a blood vessel. If we get in there, we might see that contains blood. But what I'm wanting you to focus on is really just the main kind of darker area. That's all acinar tissue. And these lighter areas right here. Now, notice we've got these little light specks here. That's not what I'm talking about when I say lighter area. As we zoom in, what we should see, and I haven't looked at these yet, but we should see that those little specks there are going to be lined with acinar cells. At least that's my prediction. I haven't checked any of that yet, so I might be talking out of my rear end. But let's try to zoom in on a place where we can see a lot of, you're going to see some significant islets or pancreatic islets. I grew up learning them as islets of Langerhans. I'm going to zoom in on this one right here. Hope we can center that. Let's zoom in on that one, because that's definitely an islet, pancreatic islet. Yeah, so we can definitely see here, we can start to see these acini, AC, not acinine, like that's silly, but ACINI. That's what these little structures are called here, and the cells that surround them are the acinar cells. So we'll look. This is the 100x view. The previous was the 40x. So we'll look at these, and we should see them pretty polarized and emptying into this little space. So these lighter areas, those are the lumen of the pancreatic acini. But these less dark or lighter areas, and again, notice the lack of organization here. We don't have really any geometric kind of organization here like we do over here. Okay, so that's definitely a pancreatic islet. I don't see any more here, ducts and blood vessels. I don't know which is which. There's that big thing that I think is a duct. Okay, let's zoom in on this one again, and then we'll back out, and we'll try to maybe find another one. Okay. Center that up, zoom in. Hopefully we landed right on it. Yep, looks like we did. Went too far. Yeah, there it is right there at the bottom left. Let me center that. Oh, and there's another one right there. So there's the one we were looking at. And hopefully you see that little small one right at about 330. So I'm looking at this one right here. But here's our pancreatic islet. Notice these cells here. Again, I told you we would see those cells kind of surrounding a space. Notice there aren't any nuclei in that space. Those are all the pancreatic acinar tissue. And so these cells are secreting things into that space that, again, will eventually converge into larger ducts, and then those larger ducts will empty into even larger ducts, and eventually you get to the largest one, which is the main pancreatic duct, and that's what gets you to the small intestine. But we're not worried about those. We're worried about these here. So these are the pancreatic islets. Again, notice we have there is definitely a contrast difference here. So these acinar tissues or cells are darker, or the acinar tissue is darker. This is lighter. The cytoplasm looks like the nuclei are probably the same color, but the cytoplasm is a lot more purple here. Here it's a little, not little, but it's more pink. And for my students, the purpose is to just understand this is an islet right here, ISLET. There's a small one right there. All this other stuff is pancreatic acinar tissue. Again, I want us to know this is where the exocrine function of the pancreas is. This is which means that's where the digestive juices come from. This is the pancreatic islet, or also this is where the endocrine function comes from, right? Yeah, the pancreatic islets. Okay. Notice the structural differences. Again, less organized, a little more organized. Let's see if we can find one more. Let me back out a little bit. Let's see if we can zoom in on another spot. Let's go with that one right there in the middle. Right on the money. Look at that. All right. Let me scoot that in the middle a little bit more. So we're looking at that guy right there. Again, notice the arrangement of the cells into that acini structure. Again, kind of think of it as like a sphere with a tube coming out of it. That's kind of how it looks like in very, very basic terms. And then we notice the contrast difference, the color difference, the organizational difference. That's what we're seeing there. So this is another pancreatic islet. All of this is pancreatic acinar tissue. So that's it for the pancreas. Those are the two slides I have. That first one wasn't quite as revealing as the second one was. We could definitely see the islets, or the pancreatic islets, a lot more clearly in that second slide, because we had a darker pancreatic acinar tissue, had a lighter Langerhans. When we dug into and the magnification got a little closer, not only could we see that difference in color even more, but remember, we can't always depend on color. What I want you to also see is that the organization of the cells in the acinar tissue versus the organization, or lack thereof, of the organization in the islets. And so those are the things that you can really latch onto in differentiating between endocrine tissue, or sorry, between the acinar tissue of pancreas and the pancreatic islets. So I hope you found this video informative. Again, if you are in my class and you have some questions, please let me know. If you have any questions, let me know, and thank you for watching my video.